Welcome back, one and all, to UKSG Autumn Marathon 2021 in aid of Crisis. And during the break, we had a $15 donation from Totally Not Named Dan, who said, "Great run double. Love to see that quick GOD." Now we have another run coming up for you right here. We have the Adventure Sprint Run for Distance by runner Tiyenti. Take it away, Tiyenti.
Alright, so yeah, as was just introduced, I am Tiyenti, and this is Distance. This is a pretty unique indie racing game created by a company known as Refract Studios. The best way I can describe this game, shortly, is hardcore. If you don't understand what I mean by that, you will understand once I actually get into the run. Adventure Sprint, this category, Adventure is sort of like the main single-player campaign of Distance, but once you have finished the main, campaign mode, you get to replay most of the adventure maps in sprint mode, which is basically, time trials. Just get to the end of each map as fast as possible. That's kind of my preferred way to run the adventure map, so that's what I will be doing here. But I probably should just get started with the run, since you probably want to see what this game's all about. So, I guess I'll get started in 3, 2, 1, go. Alright, so starting off in Cataclysm here, which is obviously the first level. The first level isn't going to be, super spectacular. As I was saying, Adventure Mode is kind of the main single-player mode of this game, and kind of as a result, the beginning level is going to be pretty basic, because devs kind of want to familiarize you setting a little bit, kind of expose some story information for you in the campaign. But it does give us time to kind of explain that the main mechanic I'm currently using right now is boosting. This is pretty self-explanatory. If I just hold the boost button, I will go a lot faster than I would drive normally. However, you will see that as I boost, there is an overheat meter in the back of the car, that little orange bar. As that increases, if that reaches 100%, the car will overheat and explode, which is not exactly ideal, because that means that I'll have to I'll die and go back to the previous checkpoint. The checkpoints are these big green rings, by the way. They will also reset the heat meter back to 0, so that's pretty convenient. But you will have seen right there, and also we're about to see in more full capacity, that I'm not limited to just driving on the road here. I can jump, I can rotate in the air, I can fly, I can drive on walls and ceilings. There's a lot of additional platforming mechanics that exist in this game, beyond just driving on a road. Which is kind of where I was that hardcore, if you notice the pun on parkour, because I like bad puns. That's kind of what I was talking about. This game really ends up playing like a bit more like a 3D platformer than any typical racing game once you, especially when you're speedrunning it. So even if you're not really a fan of racing game speedruns, I still think there's a lot to enjoy here. But I probably should explain right off the bat that I was already doing a speed tech. This is a speed tech known as Grip Flight. You will notice that I do use the wings of the car from time to time. The wings are sort of your developer-intended method of flight, but normally if I'm just trying to go somewhere in a straight line, the wings are actually kind of slow. So what I want to do instead is I want to use Grip Fly, as I mentioned. Basically, there's a button in this game that is called Grip that allows me to fire all the car's rotation thrusters all at the same time. And by using Grip Pull upside down in the air, that will kind of let me just kind of fight against gravity and therefore fly without using the wings, which is generally faster under most circumstances. There's even ways that Grip Fly can be optimized a little bit more than just the base form. You will notice that my thrusters will start out with a blue coloration while I'm grip flying, and then will gradually turn orange. While the thrusters are blue, they are much more powerful. Once they turn orange, they go to about 40% of the normal thrust power. And you'll see me doing stuff like nosing down while grip flying, or even just tilting up after certain jumps on the road to try and get the most out of those blue thrusters, since if you angle them correctly, you're actually able to get speeds faster than your normal ground boosting speed, which is pretty cool and kind of a pretty simple optimization to do, especially for these jumps and stuff. But I probably should mention that the stuff that wings are useful for, as I take the first of the many teleporter shortcuts that we'll see in this run. Wings are good for stuff like this. If you need to change direction really quickly, wings are good, because while Grip Fly is fast, it's not very maneuverable, since there's no way to adjust your yaw rotation axis using grip and only the rotation thrusters. So Uh, it can be pretty slow if you need to turn while using grip fly, but wings, because they're far more maneuverable, you can use them to change direction like pretty quickly and kind of conserve your momentum while doing that. Wings are also useful if you need to gain height really quickly, kind of like what I did at the start of this level. You can also use this for various stuff like smoothing out in a landing, trying to preserve your momentum that way. And wings are also good for kind of just maintaining your height, which is especially useful when you're doing all these rolls, which you will probably wonder why I am doing all those rolls. I think people in chat have already kind of explained this, but basically, rolls are one other way that I can cool down the car, because obviously I mentioned that checkpoints reset the heat meter back to 0, but obviously when I'm not near any checkpoints, then I don't exactly get the benefit of that. So by doing rolls, while they do look cool, that also allows me to be cool in a different sense, since you will see that I will build up a bunch of EV, that's kind of the points, I guess, and once I land, that EV will be translated into cooldown, which allows you to boost for longer once you land on the ground. There's some other stuff that I also could mention, like these teleporters will also reset the heat meter like a checkpoint, and also there were some blue cooling rings that also serve to cool down the car, though unlike checkpoints and teleporters, cooling rings don't decrease the heat meter entirely, but it is a pretty significant decrease. I think it's about like 60 to 7% of the heat meter's max capacity or something. Here in this map, I'm gonna use this shortcut teleporter here, which is gonna put us into this trippy looking triangle world. You're probably wondering what that's all about, since none of the other shortcut teleporters had something like that. And I guess to kind of maybe give some context for that, I need to kind of explain that if you're actually playing in the main campaign mode, then you don't actually start the campaign with all your abilities unlocked. You have to kind of unlock the boost, the jump, the wings, and then the rotation thrusters in that order. And this is the map where you would unlock wings if you're just playing through the main campaign. So that's kind of the first shortcut teleporter that the developers intended you to have access to, I guess, at least if you're playing the main story. Although there are actually ways that you can get to the earlier shortcut teleporters without all your abilities, but they were pretty janky, and not a lot of people really enjoy playing the game like that. It's just a lot more fun if you have the full freedom of movement, because that's kind of what makes this game different from a lot of other racing games. Although, as I kind of mentioned, I am not actually playing in the adventure campaign mode. I'm playing in sprint mode, which is kind of the arcade mode, removes all the story stuff when you're replaying the adventure maps in it, and therefore I don't have to deal with any of that. Although some people who are already familiar with this game may perhaps be wondering why I'm not running Campaign Plus, which is actually a pretty similar run to this. As you would expect, Campaign Plus is kind of like your New Game Plus option. Once you unlock that, you're able to kind of replay Adventure Mode for your abilities unlocked in the beginning. It is pretty similar. There obviously is some differences between like Sprint Mode and Campaign Plus. There's some minor stuff, like Camping Plus still has a lot of the story stuff that Sprint removes. So there will be some... Camping Plus has some cutscenes in it. There is some story dialogue that gets played throughout the maps, which isn't there in Sprint mode. Although the lack of cutscenes doesn't actually change the run too much, since most of the cutscenes just can be skipped anyway, but it does change strats in a couple maps, and there is a couple unskippable cutscenes, so there is a bit less downtime in the Sprint mode version of the category. But there is some more major differences, like the ending of the games included in the sprint level set, which shortens the run by several minutes. But there's also actually a gameplay mechanic that exists in Campaign and Sprint, but not in Campaign Plus for some reason. And personally, I don't really like the absence of that mechanic, but I also don't really like not having abilities at the start, so I personally consider Sprint mode to be kind of the best of both worlds in regards to how to speedrun adventure mode, so that's kind of why I personally prefer it. Although I'll kind of explain that mechanic once I actually get to it, because right now the Sprint and Camping Plus are pretty much the same, but just kind of keep that in mind. In like a couple levels down the line, I'll be able to explain what that is, because it will actually show up. For the time being, though, I guess I can maybe talk about Abyss here, which is the name of this map. I haven't really talked about the names of the maps too much, just because I've had a lot to explain, so there wasn't really much room for it. But the main gimmick of Abyss is that it's very dark, so You may want to turn up your monitor brightness just a tad if you want to actually see what's happening. Here I'm going to try to land in this wire. That's basically to reset my thrusters back to their blue state. As I kind of mentioned, your thrusters will get weaker after using them for a certain amount of time in the air, and obviously that resets when you land on a surface, or to be specific, it resets whenever a single wheel contacts a surface, but I'm not super good at doing those like single wheel thruster resets, so you won't really be seeing too many of those from me. They can be pretty tricky to go for. In this map, though, there was actually another new mechanic that gets introduced. Those blue sparklers that I drove through earlier is what is known as a drag trigger. That will reduce the drag of the car and therefore increase the maximum speed that I can drive until the end of this map. You can actually get a pretty good visual indicator of that. That white ring around the car, like around like the compass looking thing at the back of the car, is actually a speedometer. And you can see that like my normal ground boosting speed fills it up about like 3/4 of the way full, but at the end of Abyss, once I had gotten the drag trigger, it was completely full. So it's actually a much larger speed increase than it looks like it is. Like, it doesn't really feel like you're going that much faster when you get it, but you lose about like 10 seconds if you miss the drag trigger, so it's pretty important that you don't forget to get that. But anyway, in Embers here, we've got probably one of the more platforming focused routes here. But this is actually where that mechanic I was talking about that isn't in Campaign Plus for some reason shows up. So here it is. Alright, so you saw that orange wing symbol appear. There was a sound effect that played. There's this new visual effect that's appeared on my car. All that stuff means that I've just entered what is known as an infected zone. And while I'm inside of infected zones, I am not able to use the wings. Which actually isn't as big of a deal as a first-time player might believe it to be, since, as we've seen already, grip fly exists, and that allows us to fly without using the wings, regardless of what these maps really want us to be doing. But, remember what I was saying about, like, wings being useful for a lot of, like, momentum conservation stuff? They can be used to, like, change direction quickly, maintain height, gain height, land smoothly. They have a bunch of utility purpose that once that's just kind of taken away from you, and you now have to deal with slightly more clunky air control than you otherwise would be. At least while you're inside of those infected zones, because there is some areas that are still non-infected, like the beginning of this map, strangely enough. So after these two jumps, you will see me use wings briefly here. With this map, Isolation, you kind of go in and out of these infected zones into non-infected areas. I guess I kind of just get you more to grips with the mechanics as well, since playing without the wings is definitely a bit harder. Whenever that wing symbol reappears in green, that's a visual indicator that you've left the uninfected area and can once again use your wings, so also keep that in mind. But yeah, to sort of recap, for whatever reason, the mechanic of infected areas disabling your wings doesn't exist in Campaign Plus for some reason, and like there is like some upsides to that, like having wings, because your air control is more optimal. Like, because you have wings, you can optimize your air movement a little bit more, and therefore complete some of these maps a little bit faster, technically, but it also makes it run a little bit easier, and in my opinion, slightly less interesting. I think this is a lot more to talk about and kind of explain if there are sometimes areas where I don't get to use the wings, so this is why that's kind of my preferred category for running adventure mode. And also, you will have noticed that I did a pretty weird clip strat there. Essentially, those teleporters, they're actually slightly larger than they appear. There's a bit of the teleporter that actually kind of sticks into the road. However, because that teleporter in particular was just kind of floating in the air, I can actually enter the teleporter at that point where it would normally kind of stick into the road, and therefore spawn inside of the road on the other end, and therefore kind of clip through the strat. Clip through the strat? What? Clip through the road is what I meant. Speaking is hard. But it is a pretty interesting strat if you just enter that teleporter with the right position. Also, I feel compelled to point out that the last shortcut in the previous map also had wings enabled, despite the fact that it clearly had the same aesthetic as the rest of the infected areas in that level, so that's interesting, although, I mean, I'm not really going to complain about that one, because it makes the last strat much easier. There was a time where I didn't actually realize that wings were enabled in that area, and it made the last like direction change into the like secret road at the end much harder. So definitely approve of being able to use wings there to make that a bit easier. Repulsion doesn't have too much going for it. It's kind of like building up, just kind of building off a lot of what we already see, although at the start it is pretty funny how we do get to see grip being used to stick to the track, which is kind of what it's meant to be used for, but we actually use it for the exact opposite purpose most of the time, which is pretty funny. So I guess, I would just also kind of mention that Adventure Mode is actually one of the level sets in this game. Oops. I'm gonna have to do a bit of a backup strat here. This is kind of improvised, but I'm sure I can work around it. And get some backup cooldown from that wall ride. Since wall rides do also count for cooldown. Yeah, what I was going to say, we did manage to get through that, but what I was going to say is that Adventure Mode has probably the most developer-intended shortcuts out of any level set in the game. Which is pretty interesting to see the developers kind of, I guess, realize the potential of all these, like, mechanics that you have, and kind of build in some secret paths and stuff. There is, like, some argument to be made that it does make the routes relatively simplistic, and indeed, compared to some of the other categories, the adventure skips are quite tame. But there is the advantage that because all the routes are relatively simplistic and very clearly marked, this does make Adventure Mode a pretty good beginner category. So either Campaign Plus or Sprint Mode I think would be a pretty good category to start with if you want to learn this game, just because it's probably one of the easier ones. But in compression here, I'm going to go into the shortcut here, and there's a bit of a gimmick here. These hexagon platforms will give you a pretty significant speed boost when you land on them. I believe this is a drag reduction similar to Abyss from earlier, though I'm not entirely sure. It's possible that someone in chat may need to correct me on that. All I know is that landing on them makes you go vroom, so that's pretty important. Exiting the kind of factory area there. This area is a bit of a nothing area. There's supposed to be an unskippable cutscene here, one of the few cutscenes in Adventure Mode that you actually just cannot skip. But since, as I mentioned, Sprint Mode removes those story cutscenes, so we don't have to deal with that. And also right here, I'm going to fly over these conveyor belts. Despite the fact they are animated as like traveling in a forward direction, they actually slow you down if you drive on them, so yeah, gonna make sure that I do not land on those. Pretty weird that they actually slow you down, but it's a fairly minor oversight, so I guess I can understand the developers missing that one. But with that, we've exited compression, and now we've entered research. This map is pretty infamous in the speedrunning community, mainly because it's really long and there's not really anything you can do to speed it up. Well, there is some stuff you can do. There is a couple optimizations known, but this is one of the few maps in Adventure Mode that just have no developer-intended shortcuts, and the general layout of the map is not very conducive to allowing for unintended skips either. It's very linearly laid out. And as a result, the only real thing you can do are some minor optimizations here and there, which would probably be fine if the map didn't take 4 minutes to beat. Even if you do all the known optimizations at like world record IL level, you are only gonna save around 10 seconds. So even if you do like all the known strats, it's still gonna take you like 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Just even though it's not technically an auto-scroller, it really feels like one for a lot of people, just because there's not really much that you can do. I just personally, I find the design decisions that went into this map slightly strange because, as you kind of saw, the developers were pretty content to just spam shortcut teleporters in basically every map other than this one, so it's a bit weird that they decided this map in particular was the one map that was seemingly justified in not having any. But there is a bit of an upside to this map existing for this run in a marathon setting, because there's not really anything else for me to say here. If there's anything that needs to be said here, this is a really good time to do it, because there's like over 2 minutes of dead space here, so yeah.
Oh, I can definitely fill 2 minutes. We have a couple of donations to start with. We have one from Apache Smash for $10, who says, "Good luck, Tiyenti. Hope it goes the distance." You did say you like bad puns.
Yup.
And we also have an anonymous donation for $25 that says, "Let's make this interesting." That went towards the Celeste any percent sound effect Easter egg incentive, which has now been met. And also Apache Smash's one went towards the Resident Evil incentive. It was another vote towards Jill. Speaking of incentives, we still have the Cuphead one to be fulfilled. That is very nearly up. So if you want to get a donation in for that one before the end of this run, then please do so. That will be to choose whether the race will be between Cuphead and Cuphead, Mugman and Mugman, or Cuphead and Mugman. Currently we have, it appears to be Mugman versus Mugman in the lead. So if you want to change that, then better throw in a donation as soon as possible. Finally, just want to say we are raising money to support Crisis, a charity supporting people out of homelessness for good. They achieve this through education, training and support with housing, employment and health. 90% of your donations will go towards supporting Crisis, and 10% will go towards helping UKSG support future events. Here's a little bit more about what Crisis do in their own words. "Every bit of our work is integrated, and all of it contributes to our purpose of ending homelessness. The services we provide are carefully informed through our decades of experience of working with homeless people and the research we've carried out over the years. Our research is driven by our knowledge from working side by side with homeless people every day, and this influences our campaigning for permanent change." Back to you, Tiyenti.
Nice. It's alright, we're finally out of research here. One thing I do want to kind of comment on is that there is one unfortunate sacrifice that we have made by choosing to run sprint mode instead of camping plus. I did mention that there is some story dialogue that gets played throughout the maps at various points throughout the actual campaign mode, but since that's removed in sprint, we unfortunately don't get to hear a particularly entertaining line of story dialogue that's become a minor inside joke in our community. So that's pretty unfortunate, but just always remember, folks, that immediate evacuation is recommended. But in any case, this level is called Contagion. Fortunately, I did manage to do the first kind of skip here a little bit. That first skip that I did can be pretty tricky. It's very easy to actually get hit by the wall on the right side. The hitbox seems deceptively large, so that can be kind of a pain, but I did manage to get through it successfully at least. This map has another drag trigger on it, similar to Abyss from earlier. This time it's colored orange instead of blue, but the premise is basically the same. Just go through the drag trigger and you will get... The color's drag will be reduced, and therefore you'll get much more speed. Right here, I'm admittedly not entirely sure if this skip is faster or not in this category. This is something that I probably should have checked, actually, but I know this saves time in Campaign and Campaign Plus because that skips a cutscene, but since cutscenes are removed in Sprint, I don't actually know if that's still faster here. I just kind of keep doing it because I'm used to it, and I could have checked like the IL runs to see what people actually do there in Sprint mode, but I also wasn't really about to change what strats I used one day before the marathon, so if it is slower, we can just call it a style strat. Sometimes you do go to sacrifice style for speed, you know. The end of this map mostly boils down to some straightaways with some pretty basic obstacles that are amusingly not in your way at all. If you're just kind of stay in the middle of the track, you should be fine. But we are exiting Contagion here, and now we enter Overload, which is the second to last map in the run, so we are getting pretty close to the end here. Although the beginning of Overload is not too engaging, since once again we have a bunch of straightaways that don't really have obstacles placed in really difficult positions. I barely even have to move to avoid these souls, although I'll give the souls credit. I do have to move for the souls, unlike the lasers and spikes from earlier, which are literally not in my way at all. But here was a bit of a swag strat, hopefully. Okay, I didn't manage to get it off. Can we get that on a second try? Sure, that works. Yeah, that can be pretty difficult to do, and it's also not even faster compared to the fastest strat. Uh, Basically, if you go through that first teleporter, then you will, if you go backwards, you can find another teleporter that will warp you kind of roughly where I was going with that strat. But I prefer doing it kind of the more stylish way, because even if it is around half a second slower, I believe, I think that is what someone who tested it told me, it still looks a lot cooler, and I mean, if it is only half a second slower, it's still a pretty viable alternate strategy, so yeah. Once again, gotta sacrifice some speed for style in this case, just because it's a much cooler strat. The ending here, gonna make sure that I have, like, short hop a little bit by using grip, to make sure that I don't hit into these pop-up blockers that come down from the ceiling. And some people may be interested to know that on those last two saws right there, you can actually kind of jump on one of those saws and get a massive boost of speed. I'm not doing that because I don't know how to do it. And yeah, I'm sorry, Brionac, I'm not doing the saw boost. I don't know how to do it, and I don't feel like leaving my success at the end of this map to RNG, essentially, because landing on the saws can be pretty random. But, with that out of the way, we've now entered Ascension, which is the final map of this run, and this perhaps has one of the more interesting routes throughout a lot of the adventure maps, because an out-of-bounds strat was recently discovered for this level, so I'll be trying to show that off. But first, I gotta do this fun thing here, which I kind of botched the entry into. But yeah, here we have what I like to refer to as the Tunnel of Death. It's basically a tunnel that has a bunch of obstacles that you gotta dodge, although it's actually not as bad as it looks. It definitely looks pretty intimidating, but it's actually arguably harder to get into the tunnel than actually doing the tunnel itself, once you practice it a little bit, but it definitely can be a bit of a choke point, especially if you're inexperienced. Here, I'm going to dip out of bounds slightly, and then dip back in bounds at a much later portion of the level. Very short out of bounds excursion, I guess, but it does allow us to skip a pretty significant portion of the map, and also a second Tunnel of Death, which is very nice because this route is both easier and faster than taking that second tunnel, so very nice to just be able to skip that entirely, because it can be pretty scary doing that right at the end of the run. Right, so here, gonna go through this dark tunnel to get to the final area of the map, so that is the cue. That time is coming up very soon, so get ready for that. Here, I guess, because the actual adventure final boss is included in this run, this is sort of like the pseudo final boss. It's Stan the Dropper Drone, as I like to call it, but it's pretty easy to avoid. Time will end once I hit the final finish grid, and time. So that is Distance Adventure Sprint. As I was saying, like, this game is definitely pretty unique. Not really a whole lot of games like this. And yeah, like I said, I think this is a pretty good beginner run, so if you ever want to, like, learn the game or something, this would be a pretty good category to start with. So yeah, I guess I want to, like, quickly shout out the Distance speedrun community. It's a pretty cool place, and if you want, and as always, if you want to have any help with trying to learn the game, if you are interested, then you should check out speedrun.com/distance. There's not like a whole lot of guides just yet, but maybe in the future there will be more guides, but you can always join the Discord server that is linked there, and we should be able to help you as well. And of course, shoutouts to the UKSG organizers for putting together this event, and that's pretty much all from me, so enjoy the rest of the marathon.
GG's there, Tiyenti. You came in at 26:55 there, just in case you are interested. But yes, thank you so much for that fantastic run. That's all you can hear from me for the rest of the marathon. And the next voice that you will hear after the break will be that of the lovely HUDs 601. But I just want to say a big thank you to UKSG for letting me have my first ever hosting shift on any speedrun marathon. It has been an absolute blast. After the break, we're going to have a real treat for you. It's going to be the No Major Glitches race of Cuphead between Kev360 and Bexy Boy 123. So, in the meantime, see you in a mo.